This is the Texas Land Guys podcast, hosted by brothers Tim Dosch and Tom Dosch. With their partners David Marshall and Trip Rich, they have built DMRE, the leading land brokerage in Texas. With decades of experience brokering deals between landowners and real estate developers, they take you inside the deals that move the market.
Welcome to the Texas Land Guys podcast. Sitting here in the Dallas studio. Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. We've had some technical difficulties. We've been sitting here for the last maybe 45 minutes trying to get it all figured out, but we have a good team that's been working hard and got all the wires plugged in right and everything done right. So we're finally on air.
I guess AI is going to take over the world, except for hardware. Just gets in the way because these settings are pretty complicated. But yeah, we're back online. When you just said that, I don't know how many of these episodes we've started with. Well, we had technical difficulties getting started, but it just so we have a lot of really good equipment. But one little change in a setting or just kind of throws everything off. So sometimes
it's crazy. Yeah,
it's funny. We were just talking as we were waiting to get things working about a text you sent me yesterday. I guess something you saw on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so there's a picture on LinkedIn of on one side a tombstone that said like born 1947, and then the other side was a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think he's actually close to 80 now, but in the picture he's 75, holding some dumbbells, and he's just still in incredible shape. And I think what they were trying to communicate is just the average American who doesn't take care of themselves and isn't healthy is already dead. Who's that age? Yeah, because I think the life expectancy for a man is still like in the low 70s, but he's actually in really good shape because of all the muscle he built throughout his life and how hard he worked out. And it's crazy as people get older, when you look at people that work out and take care of themselves, how much younger and more able they are than people that just, don't prioritize that.
Yeah, that was incredible. I just looked it up. It's for men, it's 76 and a half years old.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's crazy to think about that. Seeing that picture, he's still in really good shape and really prioritizing his health. And I think that obviously for him, that's like, that all started when he was a lot younger. And building a really, really important, you can't like start doing that, when you're 65 and expect to see those kind of gains. But it's pretty cool that he's decades
of being super diligent, eating really healthy. Obviously he was at the top end of performance, but muscle is really protective. And there's even studies, a lot of the bodybuilding community is not necessarily healthy because they're taking steroids and they're doing a lot of things that aren't healthy, but having a lot of muscle is actually pretty protective, especially against cancer. So there's some pretty interesting studies, even just within bodybuilders, about a lower incidence of cancer because of high muscle mass. So yeah, I think you're right. Just trying as young as you can, whenever you start, even if you're older, it's okay to start now, but start taking care of yourself, eating healthy, lift weights, exercise. And there's a lot of benefit to it, a lot of brain benefit, not just looking good, but the way your heart operates and brain works and stuff like that.
You sent me another picture yesterday too. Christmas came early. So what was in all those boxes in your garage?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Speaking of trying to build muscle, I've just started going heavier and heavier on dumbbell presses. One of the things I've looked at, so I'm in my mid 40s now, and when you press, bench press, and really any kind of press with a barbell, it forces your shoulder into like a, both your because you're locked in with both hands, you get kind of forced into a certain path, bar path, which can be hard on your rotator cuff long term if you're lifting heavy. And so I'm not getting away totally from barbells, but I'm going heavier on dumbbell pressing. And I've never really had like really heavy dumbbells. I've had like 50s and 60s, but I got all the way up to 110s. And so, I'm starting to press heavier because it actually protects your rotator cuff and protects your shoulder if you lift that way. I want to be doing this, as long as I can. And I want to be able to, to lift as heavy as I can without being injured. And so that's kind of what I was doing. So I got two big kind of crates from Rogue with a lot of gear. I had to get a whole nother dumbbell rack. Kristen was like, why do you get a whole nother rack? And I was like, these dumbbells are big. They take up a lot of space. I don't want to just have them like all over the floor. So I had to get a whole nother rack. So
that makes me think of Grandpa when he turned 80. He had the picture he sent to the family where he was lifting with his shirt off.
He was like curling 40s or something like that. Yeah.
But he did that, to your point about wanting to do that for a long time. It probably comes even just from our family because he did that. He stayed really healthy and lived into his mid-90s, but was walking, lifting every
He was
day.
lifting into his 90s. I mean, he just used dumbbells. He didn't even have a bench or anything, but he would lay on the ground and do like the bench press on the ground, which is pretty hard to do with dumbbells. But it's amazing how much the better quality of life you can have when you take care of yourself. And a lot of it just, there's a lot of learning, that goes into it. And obviously there's a lot of discipline, but it's pretty fun when you get into it and you challenge yourself with a new movement. Like for me, it's, even though I've done a lot of pressing in my life, the dumbbell press is just a totally different mechanical exercise than a barbell press. And so I've noticed there's a need for some neural adaptation that takes, a couple of weeks to get more efficient with that. And especially when you challenge yourself on weight and you go heavier on weight, just getting them into position and everything. There's just a lot of learning, which is actually really good for your brain to be challenged in a different way that you're not used to. And that kind of makes it fun. I know like you've done a lot with kettlebells, which I've never really gotten into, but picking out a different kind of exercise, I think as you get older, and if you want to do this for decades, you can't just do the same thing forever. You got to try different things that kind of challenge you in different ways. And so I think that's a good way to do it.
Well, I need to take up what you're talking about because I did hurt my shoulder, my rotator cuff recently. We haven't even talked about it, but I think it was actually from some physical work I was doing last time we were up in the mountains, just with some different trees and some stuff that I was clearing out. So I need to probably work on building it back up with the dumbbells like you're talking about. So I don't have 110s yet, but I'll start working with the ones I have. And see
to be honest, I haven't lifted the 110s yet. So I'm working up to that. I'm gonna be careful because when you're older, you don't want to just ego lift, and there's a temptation. I could probably do it, but I don't want to hurt myself, so I'm gonna go slow. But I'm gonna have them there on the shelf, ready to look forward to. So
yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I thought today what might be interesting to talk about is buyer interviews, and we've been having a lot of those just this time of the year. Being in the spring, we market a lot of properties, and so we run a lot of the marketing processes that we'll run in selling land tend to be in the spring or the fall. And so just here in Dallas, we've had several really well-located tracts that we've marketed, and we've done a call for offers, and then we've set a best and final. And a lot of times part of that best and final process is a buyer questionnaire and then a buyer interview call with the landowner. I've been a part of a lot of these, and you've been a part of a lot of these over the years. And we were reflecting on just a lot of the things that buyers will say in these interviews. And for a landowner, it depends on just your level of sophistication, what you're going to pick up on. If you're going to pick up on maybe things that are said almost by every buyer that you almost can kind of disregard. So we want to talk through some of those. And then what you should actually be looking for, what's important to be thinking about. And we boiled it down, I think, to like five things that you should really be focused on as a landowner interviewing a buyer to purchase your property. Because our business, you made this comment, Tim, earlier, it's really simple, but then at the same time, it's actually not, because there's not just one factor. Like interest rates changing doesn't just automatically mean that your property works, or good rents in the market doesn't automatically mean. I mean, there's actually so many different things, so many different factors that you should be thinking about. But these five, especially when you're running a process, qualified offers, and you're trying to compare kind of, are these good? Are these great? What's the right offer to move forward with? These are five really important factors.
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation because like we had talked about earlier, it is really simple, but at the same time, it's really complicated. And there's so many little nuances, and every deal is different. I think you mentioned earlier about a client who was talking about multifamily land within a city and asking you what you thought the value was, but he wouldn't tell you where the site was. It's like, literally, it could be the spectrum of what it can be is so huge. Sometimes it can be in the same submarket. There could be a huge difference in value, and there's all these different characteristics to sites and timing the market and different buyers, different use types. And so it's not that complicated, but it takes a lot of experience. And there's a lot of things you have to really understand at a pretty deep level to make wise decisions. And there's a lot of ways that people make poor decisions. And we did talk earlier about sometimes people get lucky when they think that because they got lucky that they did something right. And a lot of times it was like, the way you did it just worked. Sometimes buyers do bad deals. We've sold sites before that we can't even believe someone paid that much for that site in that location. And typically they get destroyed with whoever they build. But that doesn't mean that necessarily is going to always make sense or can be repeatable. And so what we're talking about is how do you make wise decisions that are repeatable that you can do over and over again in different kinds of sites, different kinds of uses, different kinds of markets to make the best decision for yourself as a seller.
Yeah, and I think you have to understand, if you're a seller, that you're dealing with buyers, and there's a wide spectrum of buyers, but you're dealing in a lot of cases with a junior acquisitions person at a company, and their responsibility is really to go put properties under contract that then they can go do a deep dive on, that then they can go present internally to see if it gets approval. And so really at the LOI stage, just getting that offer, you may be very, very early on in the process. Like so early on that I had a client say the other day, the LOIs aren't worth the paper they're written on. There's a lot of times some truth to that. It really has a lot to do with how progressed is the site itself? How much is known about the site? Is it zoned for the use? Do you know if it has utilities? Like there's a lot of different things. If a lot of those questions are answered, then maybe the LOI is pretty dialed in, but then you're open up to like market risk. That's really important though, because I think a lot of landowners just assume if I get a $10 million offer and I can go look up their website and it looks like they're a legitimate company, then like my property is going to sell for 10 million. Or I had a landowner tell me, well, I'm under contract at this price and it was a little bit higher than where you BOV my property. Kind of like, you must have been wrong in your value. And my response was, well, just being under contract is a whole lot different than closing. And obviously I hope that his deal closes, and our value was within 5%, which on a land deal is that's not zoned is kind of like hitting the jackpot. But even so, it'd be interesting the percentage of land development deals in the market that go to LOI and then don't close, or go from LOI even to contract and then don't close. I mean, Tim, I would guess that offers that get accepted at LOI stage that actually end up closing might be something like 10% of transactions, because a lot of deals never even make it to contract. You agree to the LOI and then it falls out before contract. And then a lot of them never make it out of due diligence. And then there's others, like we've had deals that the market changes and developers walk away from millions in non-refundable earnest money just because the market changes. So we want to talk through, as a landowner, a seller, what should you be focused on in these buyer interviews? Because there are so many different factors at play. So what should you be focused on and really thinking about to try to make the best decision?
Yeah, and to your comment about LOIs and are they just worth the paper they're written on, a lot of it has to do with who signed the LOI, who it was from. Because we have certain groups that we know that have a good reputation in the market that do a lot of deals that would never put an LOI in that they wouldn't stand behind. And they've done a certain level of due diligence, and they have capital or they have access to capital. They're not trying to waste their time. If they make an offer, and certainly when we make offers, we believe we would do this deal at this price. We have cash, we're going to close. So what's really gets complicated is there's times where you have very credible, real groups. I'm talking about national developers, groups who've done a lot, that are very serious developers. But on certain kinds of deals, there are times where their LOI is only worth the paper it's written on. And without mentioning names, I know you feel that way about a lot of groups. We'll get sometimes 10 or 15 offers, and we'll have several offers at the top. And they definitely have a website. They've done billions of dollars in transactions. They're very credible in some ways, but they also maybe don't have the best reputation of always closing deals, of getting deals capitalized. Maybe that takes them a long time to get deals done. I mean, it's funny how there are some of these developers that it's typical that it takes them 18 months to get a deal closed. And they're just like these beat down deals. They're always asking for extensions, and there's all these excuses, and they don't want to take any risk on the site, with any kind of due diligence money or hard earnest money. And then there's the groups that they get stuff done. I mean, they get deals done as quickly as they can. They overcome problems. If, environmental problems come up or there's zoning issues that come up, they go figure it out. And so when we get a lot of offers, we're looking beyond, what's on the paper to who's behind it. And I think when you start talking about these key characteristics, whether it's questions to ask or things to watch for, one of the big things that we look at all the time is honesty. Not like a lot of people get really salesy. A lot of developers will get really salesy, and they'll start making a lot of comments that might sound good, but they're not always very honest. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that. What does that mean to be honest? What are you looking for as a seller? And is this person being genuine and honest with me, or are they just trying to kind of sell me? Because for them, if they can get the property tied up and get the rest of the market to stand down and move on to something else, they got you in more of a vulnerable position. Because now if they drop the deal, now you're a site that's been dropped, which is not very good in the market, because the rest of the developers are like, well, why did they drop it? There must be a problem with this site. Maybe it couldn't get capitalized. There's a due diligence problem. So you really want to feel good about who this is before you go under contract and feel that they're going to treat you the right way.
Yeah. Well, I think when it has to do with honesty, it may be hard if it's your first interaction with the buyer, but maybe just be looking for things that sound too good to be true. And so a statement that you and I probably hear in 80 to 90% of meetings with a seller and a buyer is the buyer will say, like, we've never dropped a property. We always follow through on our word. We always follow through on our LOI. We always follow through on our contracts. And we know that that's actually never true. The honest thing to say there would be, and there are some developers that will say this, like, we have had to drop properties because everybody has. So that's the honesty you're looking for. It's being willing to say, like, something might come up versus trying to be so, like you said, salesy about it. The other one would be really making it about, we have discretionary capital and that's fully in the bank and we can close. Because even though some groups do have funds and they do have the ability, at the end of the day, there's not really any fully discretionary capital. And we see that used like very, very rarely, because that capital, if it is internal capital, it still has yield requirements. And a lot of times the requirements for that capital might even be higher. So you just want to be careful the way that developers are pitching themselves. If they're pitching themselves as like way too good to be true, then that right there is just a red flag. So I think that's one way you're looking for honesty.
Yeah, and I think just to make the point, we're talking about developers here who are going to build probably apartments. I think is what we're probably talking about. Although there's other uses we're speaking about here. An investor is different. An investor may have cash. And sometimes there are developers, and this is very, very, very rare, who will take a property down all cash. And that's probably like 1 or 2% of the time. Most of the time, they're getting institutional capital to actually build the deal, which might be a $60 to $100 million development. And so, having the cash for the land is not very important. Having the cash to build the deal is what's important. And nobody's just carrying that kind of cash around. And so I think that's what you're talking about. And I think that's the thing that we've heard so many times. Like, we have our land fund, it's $2 billion. And then it's like they'll come back to you a couple months later. Yeah, we were trying to get it capitalized. We're having a hard time. Like, well, what about the land fund? And it's like, well, yeah, the land fund couldn't do this deal. They had, for some reason, whatever, they can't do this deal. So they're looking at other deals. And so I think that really the honesty can be, hey, we're going to go get it capitalized. And we think we have a good chance, and here's why. And, we think this is what capital's looking for. There's some sort of a story, but there's some honesty if we have to go do that. And until the capital's raised, we don't have a deal. And we're probably not going to go spend significant due diligence dollars or put up a lot of hard money until we have capital. Because that's the truth 100% of the time. Nobody's going to go spend $1 million in hard-earned money and pursuit costs and not have a deal capitalized. There's just too much risk.
And like you said, a deal capitalized is thinking about the project, the $80 million project, not the $8 million land transaction. Well, that's really what they're thinking about. So I think as a landowner, that's what we always would say is the most important thing to think through is the capital. And I was actually explaining this to one of our younger guys yesterday. If a site is kind of a difficult site in that it probably is not going to, it's more pioneering, it's maybe more tertiary, there's not going to be as much capital interest in it, then you want to pick a buyer with private capital. They can do something a little bit outside the box. Although if a property is like a really well-located site and it's what capital is looking for, you actually probably are going to trade off on value by picking a group that has capital versus someone that's going to go raise money. Because it's the groups that go raise money and get several term sheets that can pay the most and can get the most aggressive. But it depends on where you are in the cycle and where you are in the market. Because that when the market's hot, those are the groups you want to work with. The big merchant builders, they can overpay and they can close and they'll do a lot of deals. But when the market slows down, those groups have a really hard time capitalizing anything. I think what landowners oftentimes struggle with is thinking, I can go with a group that can close quickly, all cash, and they can still pay what the merchant builder who can really get aggressive with the institutional money can pay. But it's two completely different buyers. The groups with all cash, except for in very, very unique situations, are always going to be looking for a discount to use that cash. And really they should be, because that is a competitive advantage that they have.
Yeah, another difference is if someone is raising institutional capital, which is typically, I'd say like 90% of the time, that's what's going on. There is a pecking order with that institutional capital. So everybody's going to the same groups, but there are certain developers who've done more deals with those groups and have their ear. And their deal, if you think of it as, not that it works this way, but if an institutional capital is sitting at a desk and there's just a stack of deals on their desk that may be 100 deep or a couple hundred deep, they're looking at certain developers. Oh, this came from this group. We've done 15 deals with them in Texas. We're going to look at that before the guy that we've never done a deal with, or we did one deal with them. And so all the time we'll hear these groups that haven't done very much. I'm like, oh, we have Carlisle's ear, we have so-and-so's ear. And it's like, well, you haven't done very many deals with them, or you've done one deal with them. The guy over here has done 15 deals with them. Like, who do you think is going to get their ear? And so that's another good thing to remember. Everybody will claim to have institutional capital relationships, and they probably do to some extent. But the proof is in how many transactions have you done with them. And especially if you're doing it in multiple markets and it's more programmatic at a higher level within your development company, that feels a lot better than someone who's just going to try and wedge in there and get their deal in front of the capital.
Yeah, and I think so if capital is probably the number one thing to focus on in the buyer interview, and thinking about what type of a property is it. It could be a property that's really well suited for the group that's going to go raise institutional equity, or it could be one where if that's their plan, it's going to be a coin toss or less percentage chance it's going to get done. The second area would be what's their investment committee process. And that's an area that a lot of times you're not really thinking about, because if you're getting sold in the buyer interview, and you may even have someone that's pretty senior in the company on the call or in the meeting, but you need to understand what is their investment committee process, who sits on that, when is that decision made. And some of these groups have several investment committee meetings. Or you'll have the one where you're actually sitting there and you're talking to like the owner of the company and he's making the decisions. And that's a huge difference. And I think a lot of times that doesn't come out very clearly. So that's something we always really like to ask buyers, is what that process is. Because like yesterday, I had a developer in the office that he owns the company. So when he says like, this is what we can pay, we will do this, there's no one else he needs to go talk to. That's his decision. But then I just had an experience on another deal where a buyer made it, through several rounds with really aggressive offers. So made it through several rounds to the best and final. And then one of the more senior people in the company came and toured the property and just decided to pull out. The local developer had spent a ton of time on it. Everything was analyzed. It was a very subjective reason they pulled out. It was they just decided they didn't really like the area around the site. And that's all it was. Had nothing to do with have the money, all that. But again, and that was kind of it wasn't even a formal investment committee process. But one thing I always really like to ask is, who do you have to show the site to? As the buyer, like who has to tour the site, who has to sign off on it, and have they? And if they haven't, when will they? Because some of these developers, that may not even happen for like 90 days, 120 days. So you're going to spend the money on a contract as a seller. You're going to forego the other offers. And like you said, there's some risk there in picking the wrong group and then having to restart later. And then maybe 90 to 120 days after picking that group, you may find out that, they did their survey, they did basic due diligence, they put a site plan together, all of that. They presented it internally, and the internal investment committee decided that they weren't, they didn't want to move forward with that project because it just got in front of the right people. So that sounds kind of crazy, but that happens more often than you would think.
Yeah, and your point about you get these development partners, who are out, trying to stir up deals, and they're making offers. And a lot of times, and this is the way some companies work, they go get a deal put together and go under contract, and then it's going to go to someone out of state who's sitting in a different market, who's seeing deals across the country potentially, and they're going to have a list of people coming through their committee pitching deals. And there's a lot of times they just shoot everything down, or they shoot, it's like, we don't want to do Texas deals right now. We got enough Texas deals. Let's go do Florida deals. And so really understand that dynamic is really important. Sometimes there are people who are operating, like there's one of our clients here we've done a lot with, the CEO of the company sits in Houston. And so, we're not necessarily dealing with the CEO all the time. We're dealing with the managing partner for the office, but he can walk into the CEO's office and talk to them anytime. And their investment committee is small. And so you have those kind of situations where we feel better about that versus somebody that's, sometimes you get some guy who's 30, 35. He's been sent to Texas, maybe to one of our markets, to go start the Texas office and do deals. But he's got to go pitch people in another market. And a lot of times they'll go tie stuff up, go tie up 3 or 4 deals and do one deal, or maybe not do any deals. And so I think you're right. That's a very significant concern to make sure you understand. And a lot of that can depend on just how hot the market is. In a really hot market, maybe their investment committee is like, yeah, let's go do it. We just need to do everything we can. If we can get it capitalized, let's go do it. In a market like like we are in today, where things are kind of flat and there's challenges in the market where capital is tough, they're going to be a lot pickier the risks they take and what they do.
Well, that's a good point, Tim, because very common phrase that I'll hear from developers we work with is you have to tie up several deals to get half of them done. And I don't think that landowners realize that. It's kind of part of the game, for lack of a better term.
That's terrible.
It's terrible.
That's the last thing that sellers want to
hear.
Yeah,
it's the truth. I think people just don't understand that that's so accepted in this business, because it's no one's doing that like in residential, because they're going to go live in the house. So you're not like tying up the house just to see, like you're tying up the house because you want to buy it. But in our business, there'll be developers that legitimately put 10 sites under contract. And their goal is if they could get 3 or 4 of those done, that would be, because they could never get 10 done. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the team, they don't have the resources to get 10 land development deals done. But I could think of a couple developers right now in Dallas that's their exact strategy. I think now that we're on the Ascent side and we own properties and sell properties, and we see how expensive it is and the pressure it puts on a landowner to negotiate a contract, to hire an attorney, the time, everything that goes into that, that's a lot for a landowner. I mean, the average contract for a landowner, probably the minimum you're going to spend is like 10 grand. And maybe you're going to spend more like 25 grand on a contract, depending on how complicated it gets with the developer. And a lot of these developers, for them, they're doing that on scale and it's their business. So they don't even think twice about it. But we've had landowners we've worked with where they've been under contract 3 or 4 times with developers that just tied them up. And they're like, we've spent like $50,000 on contracts and we haven't, it's never closed. And we've kind of just been lied to. So I think understanding, are you talking to the person that's making the decision? I would guarantee you're likely not, like 99% of the time, you're not. And then there's the very small percentage chance you actually are. But I think that's a really big step, is understanding that in a buyer interview process. And an example on a deal that's not multifamily, where this just happened to us here in Dallas, was a really well-located finished lot deal in one of the best suburban markets up here in North Texas. We got all the way to closing with this builder. It was like we were within 1 to 2 weeks of closing. They took it to their final investment committee. Granted, incredible submarket, finished lot deal. So like everything's known about this deal at this point. So the junior acquisition person takes it in to the investment committee and they turn it down. And the response for the junior acquisition to our team was like, it was good to understand like what we're looking for. And it's like for them, especially the builders, it's even, I think, worse with the builders, because they're huge and they have huge teams. And this is nothing against the junior acquisition person. They're doing their job. They're just not being told. They're not making the decisions, and the decisions are changing. Like leadership is, especially in single family, they've been going back and forth, and they're looking at a very macro level too, because these are huge public companies. So they're thinking, maybe a little lot deal here, no matter how good it is, if we're just not buying right now, or whatever, they decide not to do it. But again, it's nothing against that junior acquisition person, but really important as a landowner to know who you're talking to, and to know if that person, they could be really well-intentioned, a great person, but they just may not really know ultimately what their company is going to do. And so I think we have a lot of sympathy for landowners that they do have to go through that a lot within our business. And I was telling a landowner yesterday, he kept asking me about different deals, like percentage chance that they would close. It was like 3 different deals. And I was like, I will never tell you 100%. Like, it doesn't matter. I will never say 100%. It could be, I feel that strongly, incredible site, incredible buyer, everything, but it's never 100%, because we've just been doing this too long to know that it could be a macro market issue or it could be a site issue that comes up, but it's never 100%. But you do want to pick the group that you get into that like 70 to 80%, and then you can't control the last, 20 to 30%.
And a big thing is about reputation of the groups who overcome problems, because there's a lot of developers that when issues come up, there's zero creativity, and sometimes it's the development partner, sometimes it's the actual company. It's like, oh, we can't do a deal like that. There's whatever due diligence problem came up, we're not going to figure out the environmental, or we're not going to figure out this easement issue. We're going to drop it and do the next deal. And then you have groups who are like, you know what? There's all kinds of problems that come up. I mean, we've had deals where it's like, there's wetlands we didn't know about. There's some environmental problem we didn't know about. There's some weird zoning thing where like an acre of the site is in some weird zoning jurisdiction, and they go figure every single thing out and clean it up, and they close the deal. And so some of it is the groups who have that kind of reputation. Another thing I was going to say as you're talking, I was thinking about, I think you'd probably agree the best developer or acquisition guys or girls are typically like brokers. They're very charismatic. They're like we call them deal people. They're smart. They think out of the box. They're aggressive. But you also have to understand that someone who's like that, you got to be careful with. They could take advantage of you, because they're really good at selling you. They're good at making you feel good about yourself, good about your property. And their whole goal is to get control of the property. And so sometimes the people that aren't as salesy, that are a little bit weaker, they struggle to put deals under contract anyway. You don't have to really worry about that.
Yeah. Well, when you bring up due diligence, I think that'd be probably the next area. So we talked about capital, we talked about investment committee, who's really making the decision, but then due diligence that's being done prior to the offer. Because again, like we'll run these marketing processes and it'll be groups that have big names, have done a lot of projects, and we'll get an offer from them. It's like you'll maybe have talked to them one time, and they've literally just looked at the site and said 10 acres or 20 acres, and then they just submit us an offer. And they'll talk to us and be like, where do you kind of think pricing is going to shake out? And a lot of times we'll have like a whisper price that we're guiding to, because then the goal will be to push it higher, but we have a guiding price. So like if the guiding price is 10 million, these are the groups that offer 10 million. So their level of due diligence is very, very minimal. Like you'll maybe call it like a desktop review. They literally just looked at the flyer and then made a lot of very fundamental assumptions around, again, it's 10 acres. If that's for industrial, I could fit this theoretically. Multi, I could fit this theoretically. Here's an LOI at your $10 million number. And then there's other groups throughout the process that they're talking to an architect, they're talking to an engineer, they're like really spending time on it. They're going further, like they're running it up the leadership chain. What does the leadership think about the site? There's even groups that will go talk to potential equity partners before they've even submitted, which is really risky. A lot of groups won't do that because they're concerned about, you go talk to Carlisle, and then there's a lot of other groups that work with Carlisle, and so maybe then it kind of gets on their radar, and then one of the other groups, hears about it, that they're looking at it. But that level of due diligence, both site due diligence, kind of internal decision due diligence, and capital due diligence is significant, because it's the difference from a landowner when they get these offers in understanding, is this offer really worth anything? Or is this actually a pretty dialed in offer, or as dialed in as it could really be today?
Well, one of the things that I think we really believe in is not trying to hide problems with the site or challenges, but just talking about them up front. And I think part of honesty is a developer who's looked into the issues, and every site's going to have some kind of problem or some kind of complication. And so you don't want to hear like, well, everything's fine, it's no problem. You want to hear like, yeah, this is an issue. There is an environmental, here's our plan to address that. Here's how we're going to take, or it's a zoning issue or whatever it is. And like you're saying, the groups who haven't really dug in and sometimes they don't even know about those things or haven't really looked at them. That's a huge red flag, because you want someone who's basically found all the problems up front, and they're already working on how they would address them in a pretty sophisticated way, and they're going to start working on that immediately, because some of these problems can take a lot of time. And if you wait 3 or 4 months or 6 months into the contract, and then you start trying to address it, you may need extensions that push it out another 6 months or even 12 months if it's an environmental issue.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing you want is in however many months to hear that, we didn't like the access, or we didn't like, and it's something that they should have been able to tell you at the very beginning. We didn't know there was floodplain. Something that's just like could be known from the minute that you looked at the property. But those are all reasons that buyers will give, that they dropped properties. And so I think you're right. Like also explaining what the challenges are and making them acknowledge that they've addressed those and thought through those, and then again, you're obviously looking for honesty. And so sometimes what you're looking for is, if you have a field of maybe 4 or 5 buyers to compare between, you may have the buyer that's just really flippant, like it's not a big deal, we're not concerned. But then you have the buyer that really dug into it, and they're like, actually, we had our architect look at it. It's going to be difficult to fit a building there because of X, Y, Z. And you start to understand, not that maybe that's the only way to look at it, but the developer that was really flippant about it probably didn't really spend any time on it. And so you don't want, again, it's going to be on your dime and your time to go under contract. Give them the time to go study it, and maybe come back and tell you that, oh, we couldn't get the garage to fit, so now we're going to drop it.
Yeah. So there are times when we have 4 or 5 best and final offers, and there's a pretty clear winner that we are just like, this group is for sure the strongest. We feel the best about them. There's other times where there's 2 or 3 that are really close, and we've had that happen a couple times where it was really hard. What do you kind of prioritize when you get to that point? If it's like there's developer A and developer B, they're neck and neck. We've had experience with both. They both close deals. They both really want the deal. We think they can probably both capitalize a deal. What kind of like rises to the top of like, all right, and obviously it's never our decision. We're always trying to lay everything out for the seller and say, hey, it's your decision. You know, if you want to go with developer B, even though we think you should go with developer A, that's your decision. It's your property. So we're going to, you know, encourage you to do what you want to do. But what do you kind of think is like, this would be the deal breaker for me if one group just edges the other one out in this area?
I think that we always are looking for a level of commitment. And you're talking about, you know, what I've been communicating to some of these buyers recently is this seller is not just looking for the highest price. They're looking for the best offer with the best terms. We want to know that even though we're still early in the process and something could come up, that you have conviction around the offer you made, that we can take this to the bank. And I think that hard money day one is obviously something we always look for because it shows conviction and commitment, because it's so rare that developers will do it. And I'm not talking about $5,000 or $10,000 because that's something, but these are huge projects. If you can't put $5,000 or $10,000 up, non-refundable, it's kind of crazy, especially if you really want the project. So I'm talking more like you get into the 25, 50, 100,000 day one. And we had that on a deal last year where that's how we determined who we were going to move with. It was really important that we hit a quicker close timeline. We had 4 groups that were all really strong buyers. They all had 6 figures of hard money day one, but ultimately we went with the one that was $250,000 hard day one. And that's really a rare, as you know. And so that wouldn't be something that most landowners would expect to get to replicate. But that was really how we selected it. But backing up from there, and I think the fourth area that I'd really like to get into with buyers is what are their assumptions? Now, if all the offers are strong, their assumptions may end up being pretty close. But by assumptions, I mean if it's a multifamily project, what rents are they assuming? What's their all-in cost? How many units are they going to develop? So what's their per door cost to develop? And then what return on cost do they think they have to hit to be able to actually capitalize the project? All of this is really important to me because the answers to those questions will help me understand how in tune they are with the market, how likely it is that they can actually raise capital. Because whether or not they're raising institutional or internal, if their assumptions are way off, they're going to figure that out with their internal money, and they're not going to want to do the project. So those assumptions are really important. And it also helps you understand, like we had one recently where the developer, they're very active in the market, and they have come up with a way to build that's just cheaper. And we know that in development, where you save the most money is construction. It's not land.
Yeah.
Like you can get the land for free and that won't be impactful as saving, 10, 15 a door on construction pricing. And so this one developer has a track record. We know that they can deliver at these costs, and they were just able to build for a lot less than the other groups from an assumption standpoint. And that there
in this
is
case,
just
Tom,
protection.
not to interrupt you, but it was 20% less, right? Which, I mean, normally land is 10% of the cost of the deal. So a 20% lower construction cost is massive on a deal. If you're trying to capitalize a deal, it's going to underwrite way better if construction is 20% lower.
Yeah, and the trade-off is there's the view of, well, we're going to have higher construction price and try to get higher rents, or we're going to have a lower construction pricing, our rents won't be quite as high. But like you're saying, by being able to build that much for that much less, the rents are probably, and we've seen this throughout our careers, like the rents on like the really nice projects versus just like the average projects are a lot of times pretty close. And so, so that's just, again, from the seller's perspective, a lot has to go right if the group has really aggressive assumptions. But if the group has the type of assumptions, and I keep saying assumptions, but this group's actually developing in the markets, like we know that their assumptions are pretty dialed in, then you feel good that even if some things change, then yes, they should be able to still perform. So it's really important. We did the same thing last year on an industrial deal that we sold where we had several really qualified offers. I think we ended up with 4 in the best and final, and it was the same thing. It was like, what are you going to build? That site had a lot of like site constraints. So it's like, what are your assumptions and what you're going to put there? That one had zoning risk. What are your lease rates you're expecting? All of that's really helpful because we're just looking for outliers. And again, if a group that's not experienced comes in and says, we're going to build for 20% less, that's kind of like throw it in the trash, because we do see that too, where groups they don't know the market. And we've seen that over the years. The groups that are active in the market and know the pricing are the groups that you really want to focus on going with.
Well, and I know you remember this deal in Houston. This is going back now like maybe 8 years, that DePelchin deal we did. We've talked about it in the past in the podcast, but it was this incredible site on Memorial in Houston, just a core infill site. And we had a lot of offers on it. Pricing went up maybe 30%, 35% higher than what the market thought was even possible. And we had a developer that had a lot of experience building this kind of high density, higher end product and had current pricing on it. And then we had another developer that hadn't built that product in 3 years. I'm not going to mention names. I think you know who we're talking about, Tom. And so we knew that the developer who hadn't built it recently, when we started asking about, where your construction costs, where your assumptions, like you're saying, their pricing was way off. They were using 3-year-old numbers that were completely inaccurate. And so it became clear that they were just trying to figure out where do we have to be to get the deal, to get control of it. But the math wasn't working for them to actually get there to perform on it. And because we had gone so high above where the market perception was it should be worth, this was a site that was, the market thought it was $140 to $150 site. We sold for $217. And the group that we did pick, they went hard with significant money, like I think $600,000 at signing of LOI, because they felt so confident in their construction numbers and in their capital to get the deal done. And so that's a good example of what you're talking about. Assumptions really start to kind of show how real is this buyer. And both these groups were national developers who were very well respected. We're not talking about like mom and pop shops or no one knew who they were. These were people that everybody would be like, oh yeah, they both have built deals right around this site. They were very nice deals that have been successful. But when you start really peeling back, what are your assumptions? Where are you basing that on? How new is that information? Because construction costs are changing all the time. A lot of these things are changing all the time. And so are you really dialed into where it is right now, or are you operating on some assumptions that are maybe a little bit dated?
Yeah, that's good. I think for me, that's a perfect segue into the fifth point, which is track record. We've hit track record a little bit, but thinking about what you just said, these assumptions are changing all the time. What's happening? Interest rates are moving, construction pricing is moving, rents could be moving. These transactions are not happening in 30 days. A lot of these transactions are happening, let's just say on average, it's like a year to close a lot of these deals. And so a lot of it is not, I want to wait and try to sign up my deal at the very top of the market, because then what tends to happen is by the time it's going to go to close, the market's actually adjusted and it's maybe started to go downward. And we've seen this a lot. And then those are the deals that don't close. Versus if you can sign your deal up as the market is improving, it has a lot better chance of closing. And so all of those metrics and things that are moving around and changing, it's so important to understand, what is this group's track record? Like, what did they do last time? What did they do last time there was a market downturn? In a place like Houston, you have a ton of history on that, because Houston's had so many of these ups and downs. So as you're evaluating these developers, you can look at like, well, what were they doing in 2015 or 2016 when like pretty much nobody was doing anything? Like if they were still working through projects and still spending money and still trying to get things done, they're going to be like one of a few that was doing it. And the same thing would go for 2017. And then what did they do when interest rates went up? Did everything fall out, or were they able to still get some projects done? So seeing their track record and seeing how they handled adversity and challenges in the market, and also how complicated sites were that they worked through. Because like you said earlier, we've had all kinds of things happen on sites that we've listed, that have caused a lot of issues. And some developers, as soon as there's a challenge, they just drop it, move on to the next one. And some of them just continue to move forward and continue to resolve issues so that they can get to closing. Yeah,
the strongest developers are never out of the market. They might change what they work on, and they don't just go tie stuff up that has no possibility of getting done. But like you're saying, we've had developers in every single cycle, they're active doing deals, and they may do fewer deals in bad times, and they may need a little bit more time. And there's, they do adjust to the market, but they never just go sit on the sidelines and just sit it out. And a lot of times their best deals are the deals that they had to put together when things were really hard to put together, and then they delivered them right as things were coming back. So I think that's track record is really, really important. And for us, doing this now for over 20 years, you see different companies and different developers go through all these different situations, and you also see types of people. I think that our business is a people business, and so you learn a lot about, just like you're saying, the way that people present themselves, the things they say. you get to feel if you can trust someone or not, or if they're hiding something, or if they're just trying to sell you. And so it may not be that you've had experienced this person, but the way they behave and the way they answer questions and then the way they make assumptions, you're like, okay, I've seen this before, and I've seen the way this type of person handles things, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes it's a really good thing.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's also just the company, because there'll be somebody, that goes and moves to a different company, but you're familiar with that company and you just know the way they work and what's required for them to get a project done. Maybe what their investment committee process is, how they raise capital. And so there's going to be places where a really good developer can be really successful, and there's places where a really good developer can't be successful. And then you see them leave and go to a new shop. And so we, with that history we have, this all, like we said at the beginning, to us, it's like could not be more simple. But a lot of that is, we're talking about like thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions of this for us. And even as I'm thinking about these 5 areas, like understanding their capital, understanding their investment committee process, who's making the decision, how much due diligence they've done, what are the assumptions, and then their track record, that all sounds really simple. But the reality is we don't have just like a completely black and white boilerplate evaluation every time. Because there's still more than that. We've been in enough different markets. We understand the product type. There's so many different factors that come into play. Like the call I had that you mentioned earlier, where the individual said, I've got a property in Fort Worth. What's it worth? And I'm like, I can't. Fort Worth's the entire city. There's no way to answer that without knowing what the property is. Because when it comes down to land, little things like access, size, zoning, timing to close, because that was a big thing. He was trying to tie up a property that he could flip in like 6 months. My feedback was I just wouldn't, in this market, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be trying to flip anything. And by flip, like simultaneously close, it just doesn't really exist in the market we're in, where you're going to make the kind of spreads people want to make. So it all seems really simple, but I think that's where we love to work. It's still a challenge for us. Like we love to work on these sites and projects and think through what is most important. And then we do all of this evaluation and all of this work. And just because we pick the group that is the best, it's still not 100% chance that they're going to close. And so it's a process that we work through. And I think for landowners, it's a pretty stressful, emotional process, but at least working with us and just what our experience, what we've done, we can really just help guide and advise through that process. And like you said, we don't make the decision. We just advise and then let the landowner, with the information that we can provide and the guidance we can provide, make that decision.
Well, normally, if you're seeing there's a number of offers that would be a really bad decision. And so we can help people not make like the worst decision. And we're trying to pick between 1 or 2 or 3 quality groups that each have a good chance of getting it done, and people that we have respect for. We think they're honest. We think that they're good people. Like you said, there's no guarantees, and those deals can still fall out, and the market doesn't always cooperate. And every deal is so different. I think that for the audience to understand, it's almost hard to understand just the variation in what can happen on these deals. Even within the same submarket, I think there's so many different factors that influence the value of a site and how it can get, if it can get capitalized or not, if it can get built on or not now, and how attractive it is in the market. But we're trying to minimize all that stuff and boil it down to what has the best chance. And sometimes it may just be a 50-50 chance. I mean, some of these sites are hard to get done right now. So we're sitting there and we're telling a seller, like, we don't know if this is going to work or not, but this is a good offer. And this is one, if you want to sell, you should take this offer and try, and then unfortunately, sometimes it's the best you can do in the current market, but trying to help them not make a clearly bad decision and then make the best decision they can. And then a lot of times that works out really well.
Well, right now, I think it's more important than ever as a seller that you have just a good advisor in marketing your property, because the market it's still a challenging market. It's hard to get capital, but there's a lot of buyers out making offers, which just adds to the confusion. And a lot of times that's the worst thing for a seller is you get several offers, and you may get several offers at a high price, and then you start to believe that that's the value of your property. But those are, again, they're kind of not worth the paper they're written on. So reach out to us if you want us to do a BOV and tell you what we think your property's worth and how we would market it for you, and whether or not it would be a property that would qualify for running a process like we're talking about with a call for offers and best and final. We love to work with landowners, list properties, and we're still, even with this market being challenging, we're still seeing the right developers get deals closed. And so the opportunity is out there to sell and get projects closed in 2026.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you have questions about land you own in Texas, send us an email at texaslandguys@dmre.com and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated.